One fact about the universe revealed in the verses of the Qur'an is that the sky is made up of 7 layers.
Yeah, alright. The claim is made in the film Miracles of the Qur'an that God revealed knowledge of the Earth's atmosphere that is in agreement with current science, so proving its divine origin. This is that the Earth's atmosphere has 7 distinct layers. These are the troposphere, ionosphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, ozone layer, thermosphere and exosphere. Is it possible that such an obvious proof of God's existence is to be found within the pages of the Qur'an, or is it a case of confirmation bias where, the moment a person forms a theory, his imagination sees in every object only the traits which favour that theory? The film in question contains a wealth of scientific information presented together with parts of surahs, creating the impression that the source of all this information is the Qur'an. But only a tiny portion of the information in the film is from the Qur'an. In fact, just a few sentences, not even a whole surah. Sorry, that was one of my detectors going off. Let's have a look at the sentences from the first 2 surahs, and as we do, let's examine some of the most common complaints about the way in which non-Muslims represent the Qur'an.
It is He who created everything on the earth for you, and then directed His attention up to heaven, and arranged it into 7 regular heavens.
Right, already there's problems. Firstly, Muslims often complain that accurate translation of the Qur'an is almost impossible. So if that is true, evidence offered in English is inaccurate and should be dismissed. Secondly, a complaint is levelled that passages are quoted out of context, but the Qur'an is not in chronological order, but is in the order of largest verse to smallest, so the Qur'an itself is out of context in a sense, and the filmmakers have further complicated things by obscuring all but the few words from each surah that they wish you to see. Is it possible that the filmmakers are using the chosen passages out of context? The final nail in the coffin for this particular passage is that it places the creation of the earth before the heavens. In fact, the heavens are 3 times as old as the earth. The earth is literally made of stardust. Without the heavens, it could not exist. It is much more likely that the Qur'an's model is based on Aristotle's from over 900 years before Muhammad's birth, or from Ptolemy's Almagest, written in the 2nd century AD. Any trading civilization would be well aware of the various ancient theories concerning the heavens, and failing this, from Hindu mythology of 14 worlds, 7 higher, 7 lower, where the earth is considered the lowest of the 7 upper worlds. The Silk Road ran right past Muhammad's front door, connecting cultures as far as China, overland to Arabia, and through tributaries of the Black Sea right up into northwestern Europe. Chinese silk has been found in Viking burials, and it is likely that the Arabic numeral system is derived from the Indian numeric system, where the first text to use 0 in conjunction with the place system occurs in 458 AD, and as a concept is widespread and far older. There is a great deal of evidence to show widespread trade thousands of years before the spread of Islam, and where trade goes, ideas follow. Simple, naturalistic observations of the rainbow having 7 colours might also be at the root of the notion. Possibly each colour was thought to represent a layer of the sky, though this is speculative on my part. In Hindu mythology, the sun god Surya had a chariot pulled by 7 horses representing the colours of the rainbow. The number 7 is ubiquitous in mythologies and is a mainstay of snake oil merchants and crystal healers, but the point is that in applying Occam's razor, the idea that the mention of 7 heavens occurring in the Qur'an is in some way prophetic is pathetic and barely worth consideration. The second passage represents even less of a surah. Barely 1 line in fact, and again the surrounding text is blurred. You would think that it would be enough to highlight the relevant text, but as we will see, the blurring of the surrounding text is intentional and purposeful. It is difficult to see what scientific information this text can add. Presumably, the use of the term smoke is supposed to be analogous to the primordial energy state of the universe prior to the condensation into particles with a gravitational mass. Smoke, however, is a product of combustion for which oxygen must be present, and clearly the primordial universe did not at this point contain any oxygen. Alternatively, it might be argued that smoke is a description of volcanic emissions prior to the formation of the Earth's atmosphere. The problem with this is that before the rest of the surah is obscured, it can be read that the earth and heavens are commanded simultaneously to come into being, rendering this explanation obsolete, but interestingly providing an indication of why the blurring has been used. Before discussing the last surah, I would like to discuss the Qur'an challenge and the notion of abrogation. For those of you who don't know what the Qur'an challenge is, there are several places in the Qur'an where it is suggested that the lack of imperfection in the book is proof of its divine origin. The presence of contradictory information in the Qur'an is a fact, rendering the Qur'an challenge obsolete. Abrogation is an attempt to mitigate the obvious incongruities. It is argued that the revelation of the Qur'an was revealed over 23 years, and the movement from one way of being to the correct way of piety is reflected in the contradictory nature of later revelations to earlier ones. The later revelations replace the earlier ones as they represent the refinement of Islam that is the embodiment of God's plan for man. This seems at first fairly reasonable, but the problem is that it makes the Qur'an imperfect on account of the necessity of God having to continually correct himself. Whilst this may be reasonable in action for a God that is limited by the laws of physics, it is an imperfection in a God for which everything is possible and sloppy literary practice. The third surah is my favourite. It states,
"In 2 days he determined them as 7 heavens, and revealed in every heaven its own mandate."
The suggestion here that each layer has its own mandate is an equivocation in which scientific descriptions of atmospheric layers are provided as though they have been read straight out of the Qur'an. The 7th layer is ascribed to the exosphere, so the rest of the universe must count as an 8th layer, in line with their definition of the word heavens.
The word heavens, which appears in many verses in the Qur'an, is used to refer to the sky of the earth as well as the entire universe.
The biggest issue with the Qur'an claim, though, is that the atmosphere is generally represented in scientific literature as having 5 layers. The list of possible layers, though, include: we've got the troposphere, the tropopause, the stratosphere, the stratopause, the mesosphere, the mesopause, the thermosphere, the exosphere, the homosphere, and heterosphere, ozone layer, and interplanetary boundary too. But if you include the ionosphere, you have to include the magnetosphere, the plasmasphere, the G and corona too. The magnetopause, the helisphere, the asteroid and the Kuiper belt, the Oort cloud and galactic boundary too. These are just some of the layers we could have chosen. Let's look at Fusilat 12 again, but this time before they obscure the rest of the surah. And we ordained the skies nearest to the earth with lights and made them secure. What are these lights that have been placed in the lowest heaven? Can't be lightning because that is not fixed. The northern lights occur in the thermosphere, so it can't be them. The lowest heaven, according to the claim of this film, is the troposphere. Clearly, the Qur'an is speaking of the moon, sun and stars. This would place all of these objects only 20 miles away. Considering that the contradiction of the evidence is in the same surah as the evidence for the claim, is it really feasible that obscuring of the surrounding text was an accident, or are they intentionally misrepresenting their own sacred text? Abrogation does not count in this case, as both the claim and the contradiction to the claim occur in a single surah. If the filmmakers do not recognise that they are in error and stick with their claim, then abrogation being redundant, the Qur'an challenge has been met. A contradiction has been found that abrogation cannot account for. All of this represents a damning indictment by omission of the claim for divinely inspired scientific knowledge in the Qur'an, but there is an even more damaging accusation to be answered, because the makers of this film did not just get things dreadfully wrong, they did not just make mistakes due to ignorance, they willfully obstructed information from surahs that contradict the claims they were making. This is not an attack on your faith, it is an attack on crude dishonesty and misrepresentation of text. Regardless of whether you believe the Qur'an is from God, it is men who have delivered all the hadiths and commentaries and interpretations ever since. For whatever reason, Islam's track record on dissent is not good. If you don't support those who make legitimate criticisms, you are submitting to the will of men, not the will of God. I would ask you to look into your heart and ask yourself if being a good Muslim means ignoring reality. We've got the troposphere, the tropopause, the stratosphere, the stratopause, the mesosphere, the mesopause, the thermosphere, the exosphere, the homosphere, and